This is the ABQ Business Podcast with your host, Jason Rigby. Each week we'll interview visionary business leaders to inspire the creative power and spirit that's in every entrepreneur. Discussing strengths, weaknesses, strategies, systems, and the problems we can all solve together for a new future for local small business.
Guys, I got a great show today. I've got Adam Campbell. Adam, I want you to go right into, usually I introduce someone, but you have such an amazing story. I want my listeners to hear it. You did something that I think a lot of people right now are wanting to pivot, and you did this. And so if you don't mind, Adam, if you can introduce yourself and then kind of go into your story.
Fully, I'd be happy to. Thank you, Jason. It's a privilege to be on your show. I enjoy listening to it, and I'm glad to be here. You're exactly right. I spent the first 20 years of my career with a Fortune 500 company and did a lot of things throughout that career, including taking a job in Albuquerque in 2012 as a general manager in a manufacturing concern, and came out here for that, fell in love with New Mexico, enjoyed being here. And then 2 years into that manager role, we went through a merger. 2 years after that, when the merger was successfully completed, I decided that maybe life was a little too short to do things you weren't all that excited about. My story really is that I'd sort of come up in a company that valued culture and valued the frontline employee and focused on who was right and not what was right and those kinds of things. And it turns out that I had lived somewhat of a sheltered corporate existence, because when I got to the end of that 2 years, I said, you know what, I think we're going to step back. And which is exactly what we did. So left on good terms, left voluntarily, and decided to basically take a step. You know, they say step boldly in the direction of your dreams. We basically were trying to do a few things, trying to travel quite a bit. My wife is from Slovakia. We were trying, there was a lot of America that we hadn't seen, and we're really avid travelers. We traveled a lot, even while we were working. But also to reconnect with our extended family, who it seemed like over the years, as getting more and more responsibility in corporate America, you wind up spending less and less time, not only with the ones closest to you, but also the ones that are far away. And so it had been some years since I'd been to Slovakia. She was starting to decrease my wife, her frequency there. And so we just thought, man, now would be a good time to basically, we'd always had this dream, Jason, to spend a couple of years in Slovakia, because my wife is from there. I love it a lot. I've spent a lot of time there, but we thought, how cool would it be to live in Europe and then to be able to travel from a home base? So long story short, and I know it's kind of long, is we put our kids in our Toyota Sequoia. We took them out of school. They were 7 and 9 at the time. We spent 5 months sort of crawling the Pacific Northwest, from basically Airbnbs and campsites, and staying with locals when we could, friends. And we explored the West Coast, and we went back and explored the East Coast. Then we got on a cruise ship and went to Europe and moved all of our things, and not all of them, but a lot of them. We sort of went through this exercise of determining what to keep and what to give away. And that was a real big insight. When people ask me like, hey, you did this weird, 3-year journey around the world, and, what did you learn? One of the things primarily is about stuff. We realized, wow, how much stuff we'd accumulated, how much money we'd spent on stuff. And then we turned right around and tried to sell that stuff for a dime on the dollar. And that was a big lesson. So anyway, we spent a year and a half there. I worked a little over there. We basically were there for the experience, and our kids went to school there, which was an incredible experience because they became functionally fluent just out of necessity. And that thing that you hear about kids being sponges is totally true. And then now we're back to the house, which we kept, which we were happy to. We live up here in Rio Rancho, which I understand is outside of Albuquerque, but it's one big family as far as I'm concerned. Right. And so now we're kind of putting our hat in the ring here, just kind of leveraging what we've learned over the years. So a lot of what we do today, or what, the value that we propose, because we are, as you and I were kind of talking ahead of the episode, is, when you go into something like consulting, or even, go into any business for that matter, sometimes you can incur a lot of debt, but sometimes if you have time to just cruise, then you can get things done that aren't, you're not have to spend time or money on. So, a lot of networking, a lot of finding ways to add value, either for free or for cheap, and just really building that network, and and then kind of getting some momentum behind us was the idea. And so what I'm doing today, Canary, the company, is kind of, it's a build upon a lot of those lessons that we learned, not only in the 20 years of corporate culture, through change management, through organizational development, through learning and development, but through a cultural journey, through an embracing of culture, and really an embarking upon the study of culture, because culture, what we found out is, it's something you could dedicate your whole life to. It's sort of like a phenomenon. It's not like, oh yeah, we got culture. It's like, it's a never ending, one can be a student of endless forms of culture. And then bringing that back and having the strength of that and really celebrating it. What Canary is built on, my company today, is the idea that culture is a long-term investment, and that there are a lot of things you can do to move the needle in the short and medium term. But the only thing you can really do to move the needle in the long term, and by move the needle, particularly in these days and times of pivot, that could even mean survival, is to embrace a culture where, or to create a culture where, like you and your recent guest were talking about, it's that pull culture where people show up on your door, not because you're paying particularly the most amount of money, but because it's the most engaging mission, the most engaging purpose, the most helpful company, the most service oriented culture, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and I one of the things that I want, when you look at your story, I mean, you had said that you'd spent 20 years in the corporate arena, but I love on your website, which is slowviking.com, if everybody wants to see, and you have a blog on there of the 3 years that you were doing this. But you said we would eventually recalibrate our entire perspective on life. What is the word recalibrate? What does that look like for you? Were you going down like a path that you felt like in the corporate world, even though you're successful, were you going down a path you didn't feel like, what is recalibrate our entire perspective on life?
That's a great question. For as much as I love the company that I worked for all those years, the culture and all of that, over the years I'd felt like, wow, a person could basically probably spend a lot less time at the office, or maybe have more time. And I don't mean, I'm not like, trying to take the lazy man's way out, but maybe to do different things. Like I always was more engaged, it seemed like, over the years, because I would study what I liked. When I would go for that company, when I would travel in, you'd be sort of like the corporate consultant, and you'd bring solutions and you'd help people, and people always love to see you. You're always the solutions bringer. And then
Right.
when I got this general manager job out here, what I always tell people laughingly with love in my heart is that once you're the boss, locally or wherever, somebody's got a tomato to throw at you every day. It doesn't matter whether they like you, don't like you, inside, outside, friend, enemy, something's coming your way because the buck stops with you. And so that was a big learning. Is, I came out to Albuquerque to pursue my career and say, okay, I want to advance. I want to take this, operations role, general manager. That was really great opportunity, and it was fantastic. So in no way am I, one of my biggest lessons for people is if you are working to support yourself, which is obviously a lot of us have to do, right? As employees, I should say, versus like entrepreneurs or investors. The best thing you can do is to find the company that's got the right culture, not only how they treat the employees and how much ownership you actually have in your role, how much agency. That's another word I really like, is agency. But then they probably have some creative compensation too. They're probably not going to pay the most hourly or yearly, but they probably have some benefits stuck behind the scenes. They probably have some incentive bonuses. There's people who understand that you have to put your money where your mouth is too. So saying all of that, we were in a really good way. We were, and if the company had stayed the same, I hate to say this, in no way am I trying to speak negatively about any organization or enterprise, but if the company had stayed the same, likely I would have never taken that bold leap out, because it really did feel like that, Jason. Like, oh my gosh, I remember there were moments I'm like, so all I have to do now is use savings and investments to travel the world for the next 3 years, go around live in Europe, do all that stuff. And there was that voice that said, you know what, that is completely irresponsible. You should probably just not do that. Just stay in your job. And I remember it. It was sitting right here on the couch in the next room, and it was a visceral moment. And I said, nope, I'm not going to do that. We've been down this path enough. And see, we've been sort of, even though you said it the other day greatly, you said everybody on Instagram is an entrepreneur. And I've had a job for a lot of my life, but I've always been doing something, some real estate,
Right.
selling online, doing different things. And so what I came to realize through that whole slow Viking period, that 3 years, was that really we are very entrepreneurially minded. We just, it expresses itself differently. And I get it. There's a lot of people who say, well, hey, look, if it's not in profit, then it doesn't count. And I agree with that too. But if you're asking about the pivot, I believe there's a lot of value in sort of following your heart, your passion, following your duty, your dharma, whatever you want to call it, that thing that's just kind of pulling you. For us, it was, even though we're advancing in this career, great job, great company, all that, until it wasn't, okay, till it merged and it became a different company. And we may never have likely left. That was why, in a way, it was sort of a God thing. I was like, eventually, at first it was kind of chaotic that all of this 20-year career was changing, but let's face it, guys like you and me, we kind of came up in a system where you kind of built equity in the firm one way or another, even if it was just the fact that you've been there forever. And what's really happening is the world's moving towards free agency and has been for a long time. First
Right.
it was in technical more than anything, but these days, unless you've got that culture, that magnetism, um, you know, it's going to be a hard road. And so I kind of forget what the original topic
No,
was.
no. What kind of one of the things, when you talked about recalibrate or pivot,
Thank you.
and I want people
Thank
to
you.
understand this because right now we're in this situation. I mean, because the situation you had was the culture, the company that I was at before seemed like with this new merger, seemed like this wasn't exactly what I signed for. I don't feel comfortable here, but I want people to realize with COVID-19 and everything that's going on right now, there's an opportunity to pivot or recalibrate. And I've been talking to a lot of entrepreneurs about this. They're saying, me being stuck at home, I'm fine. And then having my employees at home and doing more work at home. And then I talk to them and they're saying, well, we would like to go in the office, but we'd only like to go in the office 2 or 3 times a week instead of having to work 9 to 5
Mhm.
and fight traffic and all that. So this is something that I want people to realize, that in a time that you seem that is horrific, it turned out for good, and then it pivots you to the direction that you actually want to go. Where at that time you were thinking, oh, I can't believe this is happening, and then you're like, oh, well, I can do this, but then you're like questioning it. Is it crazy? So that's kind of what I wanted to stay on this a little bit, because I know there are people right now that are in those stages of the pivot, if you know what I mean.
Well, I fully know what you mean, and thank you for putting me back on that, because the recalibration, you're exactly right, is it was sort of forced from the outside upon us, I guess. We responded to it and went with it. And it was, it was a great decision. We'll just say that for a lot of reasons. And, you know, so kind of some of the dynamics of it in terms of recalibrating, what it meant for me at the time. And it may, kind of resonate differently in light of COVID. But what it meant for me at the time was, and I don't mean to be crass about this, and I felt like maybe in the beginning I was burning bridges by talking like this, but I thought no, because the economy really is, and the world is going to this direct to consumer, personal brand type thing. So I'm like, I'm cool with it. I'm not trying to be, anti anything really. We did it for a long time, then it wasn't good and we quit. But here's a sort of a rudimentary way of looking at it. Is I said, you know what? We take these trips, we go on long trips, and I used to work from the road too. We would take vacation. Sometimes we would, when we went to Slovakia for a year in my career when I was still at corporate headquarters, I got married in Slovakia. I spent three weeks there, but I was working, so, and then in my last few years, I was going around, like I said, being sort of an internal consultant, a lot of travel, a lot of remote hours, learning to be effective remotely. Um, and the awareness began to dawn on me. Wow, you could really add value and not sort of court the desk all day. Again,
Right.
I'm not trying to disparage anybody's employship, but that's just how I felt. That's because I'm a little bit entrepreneurial minded, right? I'm a little bit of a free spirit or a journeyer. So I said, how can, we could do this. And in the beginning it was, you could have a travel blog and, we've read the 1,000 True Fans and all these things. And so that's sort of what we were trying on just to see how that felt with the blog. And again, the blog, no one's going to get rich on a blog really, at least not doing what we were doing. But it really just turned out more about doing the things that we wanted to do, focusing on the relationships, focusing on the travel, focusing on the broadening of our kids' experience and education. And then the benefit, the result, the recalibration that I'm speaking of came in looking at my life now functionally. Okay, before it was like theoretical. Boy, I could do this. This thing I do on the weekends, or this remote, work that I do when I'm working remotely, this could be your life. You could literally like travel and see things and maybe have just a little bit more richer existence. And, sort of like a either digital nomad or a consultant or whatever. And so we just sort of went with savings and sort of embraced this opportunity to stop, which is what you're talking about. The COVID has given us, this opportunity. And for as crazy as it is, and as much bad news as there is, I think for the first time, people are maybe experiencing that breath of like, well, I guess we can just hang out with the family today, and then maybe go, maybe we'll go for a walk at sunset,
Right.
and that's what we sort of consciously embraced 3 years ago. And so in many ways, why we haven't particularly felt fear in the whole situation is because we're sort of like uniquely wrapped for this, just coming off of it. In fact, the timing's sort of, impeccable for us. It's like, thank goodness we got back, home effectively, 11 months before this whole thing, or 8 months before this whole craziness happened. So, but the recalibration for us was And it was like an experiment. Could I have enough, things carrying us along, savings and investments, to sort of buy a little time outside the rat race? The issue was never time. I would have taken a year off in my old job, except that you can't really get your position back. That's like the hierarchical nature of corporate America. So that was the big thing is, man, am I going to walk away from 5 weeks vacation? Am I going to walk away from a big salary? Am I going to walk away from all this gravitas that you get just for being the guy who showed up for 20 years and learned and sort of progressed? You know what I mean? And we were finally like, yeah, we're going to do it. And I tell you what, I mean, a lot of it's about positioning. We've continued to learn. I was talking to you before the thing about learning what it means to be a consultant, learning how to position as a consultant. It's different. You have every industry, everything you're out there trying to sort of pitch and space you're trying to create value in requires a different approach. And so our thing was, after all that, is we have a lot of fruit on the tree, and let's just find ways to add value. And so it was sort of a thing of like trying to codify things. And like that page you're talking about that says, here's kind of what we learned. That sort of then leads us into the canary idea, which is more geared towards like a market proposition, or as you were even saying, just finding ways to joint venture to create valuable things in the world and really create community and equity. I'm a big lover of the idea of equity because, people who just need a paycheck, if the paycheck's not there, there's a good chance they're going to stop working. People who believe in the purpose, that's the top P in my 3P model, is of people, purpose, purpose, people, and process, is they're engaged by that. And even when they're having a bad day, they're going to basically get up and keep moving the ball forward because it's their vision.
Right. And you had said something when you came to that realization where you were like, and you had said this could be your life. What was when did that like hit you? Was it like were you 60% of the process in doing this and wanting to work abroad and be independent, an entrepreneur, and do consulting? When did it hit you like this could be my life?
Well, it is just an awareness that grew over the years more and more. It's not so much a thing of this could be, but like, wow, to a certain degree, this is my life. That's more an appropriate capturing of that thought. And I still have it today. And even today, a lot of it, because of the time we were able to buy. See, that's the biggest thing is we did our adventure with our children who were 7 and 9, they're 11 and 13. And, we obviously have our stresses and strains just like every family, but there's a bond there that was deepened by that. And we were their primary teachers and their primary shepherds and the whole thing through all that experience. So it was like something they can't even comprehend as children. And everybody told them, oh, wow, you're going to look back on this and that. And all that's true. And so I forget why I was bringing that in, but the key about is like it's a progressive realization, like, oh, even today I say, wow, this is my life. I'm like, wow, I can't believe it, that I'm spending so much time with my kids, and we have a little time to play with, and what my days look like now. So I was building networking with Canary, and then ultimately, and this was even pre-COVID, we just kind of ran up against expenses. That's the whole thing is like, we're not, I'm the first to admit that, to be a consultant and especially to be a cultural consultant, again, you have to add value first, and so it's not like we've got this massive clientele list here. We've got people that we help. And, but yeah, it's like having that little time and space. See, because we've made certain investments or because we worked when the sun was shining, and I did a little freelancing this year. That's the thing, to me, even that's a massive progress because consulting was never something I even thought was realistic, at least as a younger man. And then now we let go of the fixed income. We moved through a whole journey, which was like just embracing our passion. We literally traveled for 3 years, and we didn't particularly sacrifice our quality of life. It sounds sort of like, nomad or gypsy or whatever with our 2 kids in tow, but it was like controlled chaos. We had family abroad, we had family all over the country. So we would kind of embrace the, learnings in the national parks and the long hiking with our children and things. So it was a great mixture. And so these days, it's like I freelanced hard for the last 6 months, and now we're sort of in a lull, and which is exactly why I thought it would be a great opportunity to just reach out to you and introduce myself. And you were even mentioning some ideas that you had, and I don't know, it's just an incredible time, and it's neat to have connections in New Mexico and in Albuquerque, but then also to have those experiences abroad that you can maybe potentially leverage, or maybe there's people here that are looking to either do something similar or, there's a big thing too about just cultural awarenesses, like if you've done business in Europe, it goes a little bit different than in America. That's a big one too.
Yeah. And I like what you said is, you said this could be your life. And then now you're looking at 3-4 years later after this, and it's like, I did it. You know
Yep.
what I mean? So, I mean, you actually did, and now you're looking and you have opportunities, with consulting and stuff like that. And you're looking, I may go back there for 6 months, So where before it would have been just a dream that you had while you went to that desk every day.
Well, it really did work out, and as I say, meaning that today it's still a work in progress. We're not like independently financially wealthy or financially free, but I'm not sure that all that exists. I kind of grew up on that, like why everybody's an entrepreneur on Instagram is
Mm-hmm.
because you kind of get sold that flame. You're like, dude, I'm into it. Let's do it. Let's make it happen. And I think it's all about balance. You find ways to create value that are valuable to you. One of the things that I realized, and this was a pretty harsh lesson too, on the general manager role coming out. It was tough. I think if the company was still the same, I would still be there, okay, in that role or something else. Maybe we'd go somewhere else and do something else. But somewhere in that, not only in the first 2 years of GMing, because that's just inherently tough, but then particularly after the merger, it got accentuated. But I'll be honest with you, even in those first 2 years, I thought, aha, there's a number. There's a number that's just not worth it in terms of
Right.
stress or whatever. And a lot of it's how you're wired. I came from a corporate environment where you're a solutions bringer, you're a staffer, you're a data-driven solutions guy, you're a process guy, you're a rollout guy, to just, again, being the boss in the trenches every day. And so it was a great learning. It's like you cut your teeth, you build your chops, but you also get focused on, hey, maybe this isn't where exactly my best use of my talents lie. And so that's kind of what it was, is, thank goodness for the merger, thank goodness for the chaos, because it kind of set us free to embrace what we knew all along we'd wanted. But, the paycheck is just a little too good. The 4 to 5 weeks vacation is just a little too good. And so when you're kind of cut free from that, in some ways, we still had to take a big step. It's not like it just fully does it for you, though I imagine some people in COVID are feeling like that. But I always advocate to embrace your leverage. Leverage, it sounds kind of like a cold term, and
Right.
and we always say, we don't use people, and what is the saying? We don't use people and appreciate things. We appreciate people and use things.
Right.
But leverage, relationships are a form of leverage, and when we separate it from this idea of like, oh, I'm doing this to get something, but rather, what can I give? That's a whole key to the whole thing. And that was a part of our approach from the very beginning. It's a part of, the if you want to call it the philosophical model that I advocate for, is that, it's give first. You can't look at the stove and say, give me heat and I'll give you wood. You've got to give wood first. And I think those lessons that teach you not only how to come in and sort of position yourself as a consultant the right way, that is adding value first, finding relationships that you can, leverage, add value to, et cetera. But it really works in the trenches of the front line too, whatever your business, um, adding value, creating sense of agency among the front line, advocating for internal client service, meaning we treat our internal partners, as good as or better, which it really doesn't matter, because the equation is how we treat our internal clients, our partners, is how they ultimately treat the customer, and that's some old school wisdom. It's like coming full circle, like that's what the company I worked for all those years had really down pat, before Google, before Zappos, before all these, like, sort of, what's known to be a given today, which is culture attracts talent. Back in the day, it wasn't like that, and those guys kind of took a hard line on, we're not willing to ask our frontline partners to do what we're not willing to do ourselves, and how we pick the problems to work on is those ideas come from the front line. And by the way, generally the solutions come from the front line too. And so it's this idea of frontline centrism, championing the internal client, creating a culture of agency and ownership where people, if they get a dollar more down the street, they're not going to walk because they have too much in the non-financial stakes. And so that would be another coaching, and I share this with my clients and openly, is there's a lot you can do. Eventually, you do have to put your money where your mouth is, and you can get creative with equity. I mean, real creative, but there's a lot you can do before that. So people who say, "Oh, we can't invest in culture, we can't invest in all that kind of stuff," incentives beyond whatever. You don't have to lead with salary. You don't have to lead with hourly. You can lead with other things. Primarily, in my experience, okay, not my opinion, but my experience, is having this culture where you respect the front line, you create sense of agency, you create a sense of ownership. I mean, people love that. They thrive on that. They say, "Oh my gosh, this is the best place I ever worked," and they just go to town. They handle the business for you, which is really what leaders ultimately do. Leaders oftentimes, most times, are not the ones that are most versed in the system or the process. They're most versed in the people.
Yeah, and I love that because one of the things that you talked about is in this journey that you were on, and then as you're touring the world and going through this, you talked about this pattern begin to emerge of integrated principles. And so, and I know you talked about your family being a team, and so then you kind of started putting this into Canary. Can you talk about these patterns that you began to see and these principles that begin to come out?
I would be happy to. And what it really boils down to, it's nothing that's like, dogmatic or anything. I mean, I'm a big fan of saying, don't let a dogma sort of stand in your way of being useful. So nothing about patterns or frameworks is really the ticket. I think, I spent a lot of money over the years, as do a lot of people, looking for the 3-step way, the 5-step plan, the 7 habits and all these things. And so really what this deal is that we're doing, it sort of turns all that on its ear and says every organization can do that. You can reduce the purpose of, Albuquerque Business Podcast down to 3 to 5 principles max. Really, it could be 3 if you want to talk function, And so it was like that. We were actually in Croatia talking with some people, and we were kind of joking about that, how everybody's got their 3 steps, And we said that's kind of cool. We should probably democratize that. Build a platform where everybody can come and plug in their ideas, and like reduce yourselves for all of our benefit. Reduce your whole thing for our benefit, but really it's for your benefit, because once we can get clear on what's driving us, right, a lot of things take care of themselves. And when we realize that a lot of these, discrete, individualized areas actually, integrate maybe better and more deeply than we think naturally, then we can do things like lean on our strengths, right? We can go to one principle, which is our strength, and start there because we have traction. And then guess what? When we have this sense of that it's going to interact with the other principles, then we can gain traction in those areas where we're maybe not as strong. And let me give an example, because I know it sounds all theoretical, but where we would start would depend, at least for me, would depend on whether we're wanting to develop personally, or whether we're wanting to develop our team, which we're in charge of, or whether we're looking to develop our enterprise, which is simply a team of teams. So I'm going to give you the 3 principles as I sort of behold them, and we can start there. Or the great part about it is I tell everybody, don't get hung up on the words. Like here's a list of synonyms. And that's the other part of the platform that I've got in mind, and I'm sort of building, or at least conceptualizing. Is it sort of like a thesaurus on visualized steroids? It's kind of like a mind map and a thesaurus laid together. But like, find your words, and I think one of the most awesome exercises an enterprise can do, or a person can do, is go out and tell me what you believe in. Well, go type that word into the thesaurus and see what other words are highly related, which ones are laterally related, and see if one of those doesn't better encapsulate the idea that you're trying to, the value that you're proposing, or the principle that you're wanting us to contemplate. Because it's like we were talking earlier about niching down. Finding your niche is the most powerful thing, because once you do that, that in and of itself becomes a driver. So let me walk through what I'm talking about. I'm going to start with the teams, because I feel like this is sort of like the bread and butter. It's right in the middle. Is if I have a team, I would argue, sort of my hypothesis is that what largely teams suffer from, and an enterprise is simply a team of teams, is they suffer from a lack of ownership, a sense of ownership. They suffer from a lack of agency. There's
Right.
too much bureaucracy. There's too much who's right versus not what's right. There's not enough of a voice for, the underrepresented, in terms of just like, it kind of all, we're either hiring in an echo chamber, or it just all goes the way of the boss, even though, he's a knucklehead or she's a knucklehead, stuff like that. And so, there's this lack of ownership. People will come in and quit for $1 more. They'll come in and quit just because they don't like the boss. They've just been waiting. They knew they were going to quit for 6 months, and they've just had enough today, or they're just ready. And so a lot of issues come from this lack of ownership. If you would give people more responsibility, I mean, that's obvious, right? It's like, it's not even rocket science. If you give people more responsibility, they're going to feel more responsible.
Right.
So if we can agree that that's true, that ownership, okay, is what we want, a sense of ownership, then there's 2 more principles that are highly related to that. Now, before I proceed to the other 2 principles, a synonym for ownership, and I'm just doing this all off the top of my head, by the way, but a synonym for ownership is self-direction. So I'm going to use the idea of ownership, which is what we want in an enterprise. We want people to walk around saying, that's my place. When when I walk across the parking lot, I pick up the piece of trash, not because it's my job, but because it's my building, right? It's my company.
Right.
It's my team. And so So that begins and ends with self-direction. Okay. And so we, as the leader, are who decide how much self-direction somebody gets. As leaders, it's our responsibility to find sandboxes that are safe to play within, so that when our person fails, our team member fails, it's not catastrophic in any way or even slightly to the business, but
Would
to
you?
just hold
I don't
people.
want to interrupt you, but can you describe?
Please.
Because I think this is really, 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 really important,
Yep.
especially for leadership. Can you describe allowing them to play in the sandbox? Can you hit that up a little bit more?
Well, it's simply broadening your team members' purview. Okay, so if you had a sales rep who sold only to a certain type of client, you would say, "Hey, have you ever considered cross training over here?" And you can come up with this extra opportunity. Now, here's the key part about that is people tend to need to want that extra opportunity. If there's people there who, there's what I was naive about in the beginning is I thought, boy, if when I come out and we just create a sense of leadership and a sense of stability and sort of things are just going to kind of be one way and we're going to focus on what's right and not who's right. Everybody's got a voice. Then everybody's going to fall in line and it's going to really work for people. And I was surprised. I was shocked to find out that wasn't true. And that, no matter how good it is in your culture, for some people it won't resonate because maybe they are entrained that there has to be conflict, that I hate the boss hates me, or whatever the stories are. And so let's see, refocus my thought again, Jason. I'm sorry.
No, I mean it's the sandbox, and I
Yeah.
want to get into because especially with what I think what leadership is not realizing with this when you're talking about teams and self direction, and you talk about discovery too with this, but and I think this is part of allowing them to play in the sandbox, to fail in the sandbox. It is code if you're coaching properly as a leader. You're going to find these things that they're passionate about within their sandbox, and then allow them to be able to flourish in that environment to let them do to put their as long as the culture's there, they're not going to go against the culture if you've done a good job as a leader putting that there, but you've allowed them to do something that you could have probably, they'll probably do it 100 times better or be more creative. Or if they're operating in your passion and you have 10, 15, 20 people that are doing this, or 100 people, like you mentioned Zappos, for instance, they allow them to be able to play in the sandbox because their number one thing is customer service.
Well, that's right, and they sure will. It's like there's two ways to do it. As you can either give them, as I said earlier, like something new to do a little bit, right? Give them a new flavor of something, or just broaden their existing, right?
Mhm.
And a lot of times, and why it is cultural at the end of the day is, let's face it, is this idea of, am I going to think critically, or how far into my process will I think critically before I need to call somebody for support? And this is something people go through. I went through it. I worked in IT for a lot of years. And that your first reaction a lot of times is just to stand up and walk next door and ask the guy what to do. And it's like, well, if I just click a few more buttons or I try a few more things. And so a lot of this idea of a deeper sense of agency can really be removed with leaders who, pardon my saying so, but aren't into like petty tyranny. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like, hey, everybody that crosses their T a different way, dude. And by the way, if you ever thought about this, instead of enforcing how they do every step, say, and this is a key thing. It's not rocket science, but it's fundamental. Is strategy over tactics. Hey, team, we've got to get down to the end zone of the other team's deal. How do you suggest we do that? And then
Mm.
what happens is, okay, what happens is now they own the plan.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe one of the key things that I really feel like is valuable for leadership, and I picked this up in my company in that 20-year period, is that you can get your team engaged, even if you know what direction you've got to go. You still want them to get to it, and this is huge in children too. See, I don't want to be the kind of person that just tells my kids what everything is in life. I want to say, what do you think about that? What's your impression of that? Well, I don't know. What do you think about that? And so the second principle in that model, and we're doing a good job here. It started with this goal of ownership. The second principle is inquiry,
Mm-hmm.
okay, or conversation, as you like. I use inquiry in this model. I'll tell you about conversation. In the other model about personal development, it's conversation. But that second one, they are highly related too, because isn't a conversation simply a form of inquiry. I ask you a question, you answer. You ask me a question, I answer. And so that right there as an exercise, so fundamental. So many parents get it wrong. So many bosses get it wrong. They come in, they tell you what's what, and they just continue to tell you what's what, ad nauseum, ad infinitum. And that is so dysfunctional over the long term in terms of building resilience, character, culture, ownership, sustainability, succession. Every long-term valuable thing you want in this world is in business, in inequity, and all that is absolutely turned off and turned on its ear by, like hard exercising of short and medium term goals. Just execute, 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 but don't think critically. So we've got to invite people through the sandbox, either through introducing them to new functionalities that are outside of their core competency or into new dimensions of their existing competency, into this space of, hey, take it on, dude. Like, start thinking critically, make mistakes, fail. And the beauty of it is not only, and the beauty of it for leaders, because let's face it, a lot of energy and effort is spent sort of like protecting ourselves as leaders. Is it not? Not for me. I made the decision a long time ago. I'm not selling out to just sounding good, looking good. Okay. I'm selling out to telling on ourselves, to focusing on what's right and all that stuff. And people who own the plan to get down the field, the team members, when they fail, guess what the awesome byproduct of that is? When they come back, it was their plan that failed. And that's okay. You're going to dust them off and send them back out there, tweak them up just like a good coach would. But it doesn't come back, as is so often the case in families and businesses, teams, is they say, it's just because, we did it that way again. So-and-so had their way about it. We couldn't put our whatever. And here's my thing. As right as that person is, I feel for and I pity, I'll say feel for, and have empathy for the people that live in that, because that's a trap as much as anything, to work for the boss that never allows, or to never find a different conversation, never to find a way in to create your own sandbox. See, not only should leaders create the sandbox, but as people looking to develop personally, they should be looking for leaders who will allow them to have their sandbox. And if a leader's a dead end, then you have to move on either to another leader or to another organization. But it's a shared responsibility. It's not one thing I try to tell my kids all the time is don't wait to be picked. So I think that's Seth Godin is, don't stand around waiting to be picked. You've got to figure out what you want to do and move forward. And, that's not always a type A thing. I was listening to you and your last guest, the technologist, the big data fellow expert. And it's like, a lot of it is about being driven. I heard you say about your 70-hour week, and there's some truth to that too. Don't get me wrong. We make hay while the sun shines. But what people forego a lot is the thinking part, the letting go and watching. See, the biggest benefit you get from the sandbox is you let people go, and then you just get to watch them. And now your coaching insight, your direction, that energy, okay, is going to be spent so much more constructively, because they can actually affect change through your people, versus this nauseous symphony of do it my way because I said so. Oh, look, it failed because the boss doesn't listen.
Yeah, and I think when you were talking about like Team of Teams, I've read that book and have done extensive research on the general that wrote that book, and then talked about decentralizing and stuff like that. But one of the things that you talked about and you have on your website is inquiry is a two-way street. And I think that's what we're getting at here, is leaders allowing those that they're serving basically to have the freedom to be able to, and I always talk to leaders, and it's funny. I was like, well, how comfortable is someone coming in telling you that you're doing something wrong? If you don't have people coming in having the ability to be able to do that tactfully, if they don't feel that comfortable, then you haven't got to where you need to be. Can you talk a little bit about because I think we got in kind of the two-way street, but I think it's going to kind of lead into the discovery phase of your model, if we could.
Fully, you got it, man. And you're tracking right there. It's absolutely a two-way street, and it's like a muscle. It's like I want my partners. I'm going to call them my partners, also my team members. One of the things that my company, the original company that I worked for all those years, did that was such a brilliant truth, and they speak truth to it every day, is they call their employees partners, because not only is that a cool thing to do, like when I say, "Hey, partner, let's get ready to roll," that endears you, but also they are legitimately partners because they did profit sharing and some of those strategic incentives, things that there was definitely some budget for, and just got people engaged in a way that, people who weren't owners in the company might be rowing in a different direction. That's what they were experts at, was getting everybody rowing in the same direction. So the idea about inquiry being two-way street or a conversation is, what's going to happen when you give the sandbox? The sandbox is the self-direction. That's a synonym for ownership. at the top. You're going to give them that. Well, when they go into that sandbox, a couple things are, one thing is going to happen right off the bat. Possibly somebody will say, "Hey, boss," or "Hey, Jason, help me out. I've this new dimension of my existing job, or this new, job has kind of got me buffaloed. What do I do?" And then there you go. You have a ready-made coaching opportunity, which, by the way, is going to also reinforce the fact that it's safe to talk to me, right? I think with kids and teammates alike, the worst thing we can do is to cauterize or to shut down that lane of communication by being a yeller or being somebody who ultimately just, doesn't listen and talks about themselves chronically. And particularly the yelling or the cutting short and the sort of, even if it's not yelling, it's sort of like cutting people off, and by that, I mean, cutting off their point of view, cutting off their whole thing, their sense of agency really is like, hey, you're a hired hand, if you don't like it, you can hit the door. That kind of thing is the worst in teams, because when the stuff hits the fan, or when there's a problem, when there's a leaky machine, or, there's a bug in the code, why am I going to go talk to that guy that I don't like to talk to? And the answer is they're not, and I've seen it played out again and again and again. And I find that as leaders, our hardest, the most delicate balance to achieve, because I think it's Covey that talks about, the emotional bank account. You put in every day, you pass them by, you come work elbow to elbow, you ask them about their family, you do all the things that we're supposed to do. You're making deposits in this emotional bank account. You're not paying them a bonus. You're not doing anything. You're not paying them more hourly. It's emotional bank account, and the razor sharp double edge to that is one harsh word can eliminate months of deposits. And so, we learn at their side, we ask them about their family, we have conversation. Okay. We engage in inquiry. Okay. About things that are not about the job, so that when the job comes in, it's just sort of like in passing. We have this deeper relationship. I'm big on whole relationships, integrated relationships, meaning like that I understand my team members' family situation. I understand their general priorities and needs in life. What they're mainly, what drives them, what they're here for. And so you're right. Out of inquiry, out of conversation, eventually comes learning or discovery. Okay, so again, I don't be confused by the words. Okay, but we'll go again. Self-direction, inquiry, now leading to discovery, aka learning, meaning. And there's two things that happen there. Is that not only am I learning about my team member so that I can now leverage that, again, not in a way that's cold or impersonal or that's going to hurt that person, but actually in a way that's going to embellish their career and their life. I can leverage their wants and desires into the organization. Oftentimes, people think they have a process problem, and what they have is a person problem. And it's not even a person like internally, it's that they're in the wrong position, which who knows, maybe that is a process problem. But get the right people doing the right thing. Somebody who has the right attitude but can't do the job, that's an easy win. You move them into a situation where they can do the job. The person that can do the job but has the wrong attitude, well, that's somebody that needs coaching up or out, because that's actually the most cancerous combo. A person who can do it, highly competent, but is going to sort of talk against the enterprise or make problems and engage in drama and all this stuff. That's completely subversive, and that's a person that just basically needs to be recalibrated. We need to have a talk about long-term values, a long-term relationship, and what they're really trying to accomplish. So that level of discovery can happen, but what's even more important, in my opinion, is the person that you're talking to, the team member, will discover effectively your capacity, your own capacity as a leader, to hear their story, to value them for their total self, because the person who comes in and they're a DJ on the weekend and that's like what their identity is built up into, that's who they are. They're here at your job paying their bills, and ideally you're going to help get them engaged, even more, because you got this awesome culture, and all of a sudden they're going to realize, wow, I can be actualized even in my real job. Like I got this sense of agency. I almost feel like a DJ when I'm doing my data entry, because I've got so much opportunity for ownership, a sense of ownership. But if you don't know that person as the DJ, or the guy whose daughter is in softball, or the guy who does this or that, or the girl who does this, such an opportunity wasted. It's what I call a leadership waste. Okay, we talk in lean and all that about this different types of waste, and I don't know if people talk about leadership waste. It's like you said a minute ago, this book called Team of Teams. Only after you said it was a book that I remember I'd heard of that. But leadership waste. Every opportunity we have to engage, to interface with our people, it should be spent on reinforcing culture, reinforcing listening first. And how do you do it? Well, it's not rocket science. I mean, you do have time. You do have time to walk up, help them do their job for a minute, or look over their shoulder, ask them how their family's doing, see what's new and exciting, see if there's any problems, and if you can help them solve problems. And if we're doing that routinely with all of our people, or have leaders under us doing it routinely with all of our people. Somebody's tending to the shop, as it were, the shop being all of our frontline folks making it rain each day, tending to the customer. The customer is the big boss, but because our people service the customer, then our frontline people are actually the internal boss. And I'm big on that. It's like a servant leadership model. It's an upside down pyramid. But that's how I really believe you have to look at it. You have to be grateful for your enterprise, grateful for your position, grateful that you have great people making the ship run each day. And all you have to do is kind of come in and in effect tend to their, yes, emotional needs, true, a lot of it. But also obviously their other needs too, making sure they've got the right tools and the training and just taking care of people like your employees or your guests in your home. I think if when leaders adopt that, a lot of good things happen. People take care of the business in ways that, as you said earlier, maybe the leader couldn't even have thought about.
No, and I love what you said. It's like you use the example of a DJ and somebody that was on a softball team or whatever. And something I always tell leaders is if you discover that in somebody, take marketing dollars, hire that person for your Christmas parties. If he's a DJ or whatever, he's going to be so excited to show everyone around him, what he's been working on or what he's doing, plus it's internally, everybody's seeing him do something that he's passionate about. And number two, those marketing dollars, you could sponsor that team and you're going to get an ROI of hundreds of %. If you sponsor a softball team and he knows that he works for you and you did that, it shows you care, which is number one. Number two, he's going to share that story with everyone of what's happening, but we don't understand these things until we have that discovery, that two-way street. And like you said, that inquiry into this coaching ability to be able to understand through conversation.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, how are you going to get down to that? Now, a lot of guys will tell you exactly who they are. I mean, let's face it, really, when you go onto a team, everybody either in front of everybody or they're going to take you behind closed doors. Everybody's going to sort of bring to you what they want you to know about them. And oftentimes that's not the full picture. Either it's something they didn't want to particularly share out front, or there's something that they just aren't going to share unless you ask about it. But what I found is that the more people realize that you're, genuinely care for them, that you have your well-being. And I think as leaders, we show people that by satisfying some of these physical needs. It's like, hey, the building's open, you have the right tools, your email works, the air conditioning is running, those kinds of things. Just pave the way for that extra layer, which I think is, how you create that culture is you can't say we value you and we value a long-term relationship with you and we want you to value that long-term relationship with us, the company, by staying with us all these years so that we don't lose your training, we don't lose your commitment, we don't lose your know-how, but then I'm not going to give you what you need to succeed. That's incongruous, it's out of harmony, and so that doesn't fly. But you're exactly right, man. If you're doing all the leadership stuff and then as a leader listening to this, just unlock it one more thread. And it's like the one more conversation rule. And also, if you haven't gone to the front line and you don't go and visit elbow to elbow, the biggest problem with the communication and the learning part of all this, or the biggest obstacle, is what I call the boss bubble, which for a long time I didn't want to acknowledge existed because you like to think, oh, my people, they keep it real with me and they respect me on the level. And nobody's just telling me what I want to hear. And that's not true. There will always be one person who's probably almost fully in the boss bubble. And at the same time, everybody is also at least a little bit in the boss bubble, right? Which is just good common sense. When the boss walks in, you want to sort of make sure you're not, making a fool of yourself or any of that stuff. But my point is that if the only time they see you as the leader is when they have to come in your office to say something, I mean, it's a completely defensive position, right? Which is good for negotiation and it's good for all that stuff. It's good for discipline, I guess. But the truth is not really. I'd love to go have a disciplined conversation out on the back stoop because that's where the guys hang out. It's like having real conversations, real inquiry, real learning, real avenues for self-direction. Because like even in that case, a discipline. Okay, let's go find out what's going on. I can't tell you how many times I've seen organizations just rush to discipline a certain way with certain language, with certain assumptions, and it totally skips over, for lack of a better term, not to be too woo-woo, but I really believe it's science, the emotional well-being, kind of the HR part of the employee, and it just goes off the rails. Whereas if they pulled somebody aside and said, what happened in there? Like, tell me what's going on. And if you're not doing that anyway, if you're not getting both sides of the story, a lot of times you see a form of leadership waste is, and I saw this just recently with a client of mine, is the people, if an organization disciplines on a third, like somebody tells you that person needs to be disciplined. Okay. And they just go disciplined. Like personality wise, that doesn't jive. So there's little things like this that you may not even realize you're doing. You witness something, you tell a manager to go discipline somebody, but the manager never literally says like, hey, what happened? How's it going and all this. And even in that worse situation where it's discipline and it's HR, as a manager, I always told my people, I said, my thing is I value our long-term relationship. So let's just set all this chaos and drama aside for 1 second, and let me just remind you of that. And I think that's another big tip for leaders and for whether it's teams, families, or whatever, is remind everybody of the big picture, which is we value a long-term relationship. Just use those words. It does the trick, and mean it, of course. And then that sort of paves the way. But I guess where I kind of got off track and the thought is if you're not having those conversations on the front line, if you don't walk up to that person's place of where they stand all day and do their job, and then just ask them about anything at all, ask them about their family and the weekend. People love to talk, but you've got to develop that exercise, that inquiry muscle, because otherwise when the stuff hits the fan, they're not going to come tell you, or they won't tell you a certain way or in the right time or whatever it is that you need. You run the risk. Whereas if you've got this free flow of information, your team, as your children are, and anybody that you're responsible for, are a lot more willing. Let's say they're a lot, even if it still is hard to come and bring bad news. I tell my people all the time, I've saved my own bacon so many times by delivering bad news early, you know what I mean? And
Right.
fully transparently. It's like people can deal with that. Most, it's hard to mess up that bad in life. It can happen, but it's like if you're willing to be honest fast, most people are going to give you a chance.
No, and I love so the people purpose process. So
Yep.
if you're a leader and you're sitting out there, because I think we can put in a context of that, and you've got your processes down, you found your purpose, you've got your niche, you're working in that direction, you've got people, you've got a team, you've got, like what you said, partners. Then you're coaching, you've got this inquiry, discovery, and self-direction. Then you go, what I believe every leader has to understand, and I want you to talk about this, and to me what true success is, and that is bringing about an atmosphere of personal growth.
Fully, man. You're a great interviewer, Jason. You do a really good job, man. I can tell you've got your chops up, and I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to
Oh, thank you.
your podcast, man. So yeah, exactly. And this is true. You'll find this in, I believe, the most highly effective consultants, because I studied that industry a little bit. I'm not like some genius on it, obviously, but you have to kind of understand the industry that you're wanting to go into, and part of that, okay, is being willing to expose yourself to new ideas and to grow and develop personally. Like any good consultant that's going to, and this is specific to where I was going, is change management. So you're going to introduce a change to an enterprise. Those best consultants will say, here's the deal. We've got all these processes and all these, methods and this and that, and we're going to optimize it. But the people need some sort of catalyst too. They need something to just frame this experience, right? And as you said, that's where the rubber meets the road. And so I believe any good leader, any good consultant bringing outside value, any good, team member, it begins with ourself, and that's kind of where we started. This was, over the years, I had this belief in a different way of, maybe adding value to the world, recalibrating. And it really was about how we viewed value creation. That, to answer your question, finally, an hour later, the recalibration was how we actually added value and created value in the world, meaning how we got paid. Because is there, could we get paid a different way? So what that is, and this is not something that just developed over the last few years as the people process purpose, kind of a way to kind of wrapper things and sort of scale it, if you will, or make it scalable. But this comes from a lifetime, really, at least 20 years of just many, many different studies and many different experiences and many different relationships and many different endeavors, okay, and journeys. Is that the three principles as they work in relation, symbiotically or sort of with momentum, one leading naturally into another, leading you back to where you started, but at a different level, okay, at a higher level. Because again, that's the idea is even today, going back, we have a degree of self-direction, but when we go through the process, we're going to end in a even deeper level of self-direction. So for personal development, that was at the team. For personal, it starts with, at the very top, either, and I'm going to let you choose what you like because the words don't matter all that much, either permission or access or allowance. Because let's face it, if you have a problem, okay, you don't have a job, you want a job. You have a job, you want a higher level job. You are in a job, but you want to be an entrepreneur. You're not in a relationship, but you need a relationship. Okay, or you want a relationship. All of these are a form of a lack of either permission or allowance, like a space, okay, or like a space to occur, or access of some sort, right? You can't access these new levels of income. You can't access these new levels of relationship. You're having problem getting permission. Okay, some people that I've spoke to said, "Oh, I don't like permission." That kind of, there's a chip on the shoulder almost, like no, not don't use permission. And I like that because I believe that self permission is a great place to start. I believe, as I said earlier, a lot of people are waiting around to be picked. If I just do this, and I learned about halfway through my 20-year career that if I would not keep my life goals a secret from my boss, like it was some conspiracy or something, that actually they could help me achieve them. You know what I mean? And so I was like, wow, what a novel concept, that you can actually say, this is what I'm looking to do. This is what I'm looking to accomplish either inside of work or out in life. And then you can kind of work a plan. So it begins with a form of self-permission, but let's say you give yourself that permission, okay? So say, okay, I'll give myself permission to grow and develop to become $1 million earner, say, or $1 million net worth. I fully have it. I've practiced mindset. I've gone out. I've read the books. I've imagined what it felt like to have that $1 million net worth in the bank, what it looks like, smells like, feels like. I've done all that kind of work, but I still don't have it, unfortunately. Well, the next practical step, in my opinion, and this is just kind of building on that, or it's the essence of that model earlier, is conversation.
Right.
It could be inquiry, but here's the deal: that could be a self conversation. That could be a conversation with a higher power, if you believe in one. That could be a conversation with your spouse to say, look, I've been doing the thing so securely. I've been the breadwinner for so long, but here's where my thoughts lie. A conversation with for lack of a better term, a business coach or guru, somebody that knows what you want to know. There's no lack of ways to spend $999 out there these days. So I caution people to pick wisely, because by the minute you drop your $1,000 or $3,000 on your course, the next guy's going to come up and they're going to seem even more like the right person. So what I've discovered is there's a lot of free information on the internet. And in fact, if you're willing to do a little research, like spend a little time, you can actually find most of what you're looking for that these people are claiming that they're going to give you for all that money. But the point is, you got to start somewhere. And oftentimes it is a conversation, Jason, that's a little more esoteric. Like it's that conversation with the wife or the spouse, or it's the conversation with a stranger, frankly, or a trusted confidant. That's the other one that's huge. Like some people go to therapy, some people go to 12-step programs, some people go to a trusted confidant. But to have that one outlet where you can be fully genuine in what it is that you want. And there's a lot of people that talk about that, like, hey, don't stick around people that are dream killers and this and that. Well, that's gospel. I mean, I don't even entertain the idea that I would stick around people that aren't, speaking my highest best. The idea is to really lean into it. Find, a way to leverage conversations like you and I are doing right now. This is a perfect example of, you want a broader impact. I want a broader impact. And those are just general terms. I'm sure there's a million ways to subdivide that and classify it and reduce it for our own little model. But at the end of the day, so what did we do? Well, we went and had a conversation, because that's exactly where it starts, whether it's any of those things. A conversation has to start. And so that's the beauty of this quote model, for lack of a better term. It's not a dogma. I don't claim a copyright. I'm very much an open source type person. Okay. But the idea is that you're the one doing the work. See, you have to tell me what it is you want to access or have permission to do. You have to know in your heart of hearts, or come to through work, through some brainstorming and some just action, which conversations are most valuable to you. But believe me, there is a conversation, right? Or a series of conversations, and potentially 1,000 conversations. Why this is such a simple, really kind of no-brainer thing, and it's not even anything all that special except in its impact, okay, is because it's like, yeah, if you want to be a graduate, you go to school, and let's call every class you go to a conversation. Yeah, that's pretty much that's as sophisticated as I'm getting with it. It's a very open model.
No, but I mean, what you talk about with permission and conversation, I kind of want to get into this a little bit, because I think this is something that they haven't given themselves permission to have the self conversation. And I think that's the first thing, that we're always looking for everything external to justify something that we already know that's inside of us, that we know is the right direction that we need to go. Where if they would take the time to sit there and take 100% responsibility for that, and give themselves permission to act on it, because you had said that in the beginning, it was like, this could be my life. And it wasn't until you had these conversations, I mean, you had to have them with you and your family, of course, because it involved your family, But you had to finally give yourself permission to act out on it.
You're exactly right, man. I mean, it's dozens of conversations, hundreds of conversations, and it was all in that vein of looking for that new level of access. And it's interesting because in this little tiny model, and I believe in its power, but I also believe in its power for each enterprise and each individual. See, you don't have to say permission conversation service. That's just my thing, right? And if it works for you, please like embrace it and let it empower you. But it can be whatever. But it's true, man. Is one can lead into another very quickly, and one can take the form of that. So in essence, here's how fast it happens. I'm looking to broaden my impact. You're looking to broaden your impact. That's permission, not given it yet. It's not there. It's not at the level. We're looking for something new. So we have a conversation, and through the conversation, we serve. And here's the cool part about it: is not only does it serve you because now you have another digital asset, and not only does it serve me because it puts my name out there in some way or creates a network, but then obviously, and it's funny that I come to it third because really, ultimately, the people that succeed in content, just like in business, are the ones that are serving the end user, like straight out serving them. You know what I mean? And so the final word, the final association in that pyramid of personal development starts with permission or allowance, whatever you like. Go on to conversation. You're going to probably have one or a million. There's either one big golden one that needs to happen. Maybe it's a letter to someone who's already passed by. That's a therapeutic thing. People write a letter, or someone that's still alive that you have resentment against, but you don't send it. There's a lot of power in that. And we don't want to overlook that. Like you said, a lot of this work, in my opinion, is an internal game. There's those books called like the internal game of tennis, the internal game of golf, of business, etc. And you better believe it's an internal game. I think it's all about visualizing and creating through your speech. And this is why, for me, conversation is so important. A lot of us stop at the visualizing. I visualized for years, visual, but eventually you begin to speak truth to it. Find those trusted confidants who, when you say, man, dude, I want to have a life, on 2 continents. That's it. I just want to pay my bills. I want to have investments. I want to not have to worry about retirement. I want my kids to not have to worry about whatever they have to worry about in life. And I want to live on 2 continents. And that's it. Well, that's a pretty worthy goal. That doesn't mean you have to, quote, be an entrepreneur per se, or make $1 million, but you just find your way to create your thing. And when you do it and somebody says, wow, that sounds like a great idea, you could totally do that. Oh, and it turns out you've even got, through that conversation, I'm also going to be served, through insights. So I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but yeah, it's real holistic. You know what I mean? Like, just to look at it these ways and to really, again, focus on those couple things of, if you want something, who do you need to talk to? And how do you serve? How do you ultimately create value? Because I'm a big fan of, and why that's even there, and I've seen it happen again and again, is even if, it's not even a related thing. Okay, you're an entrepreneur, you're having conversations, you're in the marketplace, you've got your proposition out there, you're pitching, you're selling online, you're doing whatever, and people aren't responding the way they need to. Well, instead of thinking it like, okay, what charity can I go give to? As you said, you're talking about earlier about something about that, like sponsoring and this and that. Great idea. Fantastic. It's a totally holistic, integrated thing. But what if we let go of that for a minute? What if we dove in the chasm yet again? Because I'm a proponent of that. I think we dive into the chasm, relinquish what we know, and then be pleasantly surprised on the other side as to how we find ourselves. And so to go and serve selflessly outside of the equation of like, okay, I'm going to get to this person, be a part of their board, and then bada bing, bada boom, we've got a business connection. All that's good. And I'm all for that. That's good life right there. That's a great way to spend time, I feel like, anymore, like just to think about relationships and actually have good relationships. It's not again, we're not using people. We're like, how do I, congregate with this person? How do I add value to their sphere? But ultimately, I would say, are you willing to go out and just do service? Are you willing to go help someone less fortunate than you? Because oftentimes what we really need is just a big dose of gratitude and of perspective on our own situation. Because here's the thing. Yes, you need access. Yes, you need permission to something. But if you're listening to this podcast, if you're living in this country, whoever you are, most of you, you've got a lot already going for you. And that's the key, is finding our existing points of leverage, including what we do well, and then finding ways to lever them into other areas. And that's why this model, the simplified reduction, to me is such a holistic thing, is because there's a lot of like, good going on inside of it. A lot of good news. Like, hey, you can start where you are, right? Because you're already somewhere on the path. You just got to get a dose of it.
Right.
Your voice is needed. The people that you want to talk to are waiting to talk to you. That's what I find is the more I reach out, like when I hit you up, in a way, it's kind of a random idea. I've been kind of watching you and things like that. but you're immediately like, yeah, of course, and it's, I don't know, it's just a very synergistic way of going about life. And what we begin to realize is there's far fewer closed doors than there are open ones. We just have to understand how to approach, how to create value first.
No, I love that. And one of the things that you said is service gives rise to new levels of permission.
There
Because
you go.
this model is, having this self conversation, giving yourself permission. You know that it's right because you're in service to yourself and to others and to humanity. So, what do you mean when service gives rise to new levels of permission?
Okay, well, let's look at it in a very simple um, example. And when I even shared just the terms permission, conversation, service, one fellow that I talked with recently, I gave a speech recently, and he said, "Oh, that's like sales." And I said, "Well, yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, it for me, it's almost like this fractal, like universal truth, right? That this pattern you can kind of find a hook for any situation. But let's think of it simply like, and Seth Godin would be a fan of this, is permission based marketing. Hey, do you like my content? Can I have your email? Yep,
Right.
there's your permission. Now what do we do? Well, how about I send you some weekly updates in the form of a conversation, and you, like me, because I had a list, have a list, I should say, for Slovakia. I'm less active on it these days, but you have a list, and you always say at the end, smash reply and let me know your thoughts on this. Because as content creators, as people who are putting these autoresponders out into the world, these little nuggets of messaging, the best thing we want. And that's why I would encourage people too, like I did. I'm sitting there looking at your thing, I'm listening to your thing, and I'm like, man, I'm just going to reach out to Jason, because as you say, Albuquerque is a small world anyway. You're obviously, it's like I resonate with a lot of what you're talking about and enjoy it, the content. And so, yeah, so good things happen, out of that. And, but so we're doing autoresponder. That's our conversation. Maybe you're replying back. Maybe it's a one-way conversation. And ultimately, ideally, you're getting value out of it, or you're being served through it. Otherwise, you're going to unsubscribe. And ultimately, it may also bring value to me, because not only are you part of my now asset in terms of, hey, I've got a list of 1,000 people. Well, you're 1/1000th of it, but you're still part of it. But also, you may ultimately turn into either a customer or a client or a friend, or there's some other way to leverage that. So yes, I believe in this model in a very salvific way. Like it's a healing, it's an introspection, it's a recalibration, it's a thing that it's a lot of good news wrapped up, okay, in your journey, in your coming journey, right? It's right in front of you, it's right here. It's not as far off as you think it is, because the next step is right outside your front door. But yet it's immensely practical too. It's like, hey, if I'm going to sell to that person, I need permission. And so how do I do that? Well, why don't, as a sales rep, I used to stop by and we'd bring guys articles. We'd say, hey, I saw this and thought of you. It's not donuts. I'm not trying to buy your business, but I saw this and I thought of you. And it was a pertinent article. That tells the guy a few things. You're thinking of him. You're friendly. You're not trying to ask him for business, and you're bringing value. Now, the next time I want to have talk to him about his needs, he may be a little more open to that conversation. And then somewhere in that conversation, we can drive hooks for potential service to either one of us. And I'm a big believer in this, Jason. Even if he tells me no, that's a service to me, because I've ideally gained insights. If I'm worth my salt in any capacity as a sales rep or a consultant, I'm gaining insights that I can leverage, okay, into other relationships or other ideas. I'm also learning about his situation and true needs. He may say something that tells me, even though he doesn't know it, he may say, I'm never going to need your services. But based on the story that I, sort of, I inquired and he answered, and I learned a lot about his story, I actually know that probably 2 years from now, he's going to probably need exactly it, and he's going to be clear on it. And so I'll get back with him. So, it's immensely simple and practical, but it can be as deep as you like. I mean, I think the whole idea of like self permission, letters to people that you don't mail, or letters to people who've passed on, it's not for everybody. I'm not saying that everybody's in that place. For me, it's now become immensely practical, and it's about scaling and going to market and finding ways to, get your message in front of the right people and stuff. But it can work for both, which is why I find it so profound, and why, for me, I say, well, where are you, the first good question that anybody's going to ask, internal consultant, external consultant, leader coming in, they're going to say, where's your problem? Like, what if you could wave a magic wand, what would you change tomorrow? And so based on that, somebody say, well, I'm in charge of an organization, or I'm in charge of a team, I'm a manager at work, or I'm a member of a team. And then we can kind of start there playing with the words, but ultimately, and I would invite people to check out, those little models, but understand the fluidity of the words. And if you go to the Canary website, which is KNARI, I know that's a very weird way to spell it, KNARI. And here's even harder to remember, or even weirder, is this .co. So not com, but .co. There's a little YouTube video of me talking about the team one. and it goes into some stuff. It kind of extrapolates and goes further into some of those points. But yeah, I think it's a good little model for individuals, teams, enterprises, and it can be whatever you want. Oh, that's what I was trying to say. Is it that little presentation on the Canary website goes into and offers a bunch of different words. So it says, okay, here's these words that I use, but here's a bunch of synonyms. And I recommend not only that, but to spend an hour if you want or two at thesaurus.com. If you're an entrepreneur and your whole thing is like, man, if I could just lock in my brand, like I've got the hustle, I've got the all these things, but somehow the brand ideation is not there, or you're getting ready to move into that, I would recommend thinking through this reduction model. Also, if you're a company and you've got five core values hanging on the wall, reduce that either to 3 or to 5, but to really look at it in terms of like, functionally, which principles are serving us and how do we codify that such that. And so if you're an entrepreneur going to market, then the brand has to resonate. Okay, right? You have to have like a brand identity that conveys those values. So get clear on the values, and the brand, a lot of that brand work with the right designer could just be automatic almost if you're clear on the values, right? And that's what a good brand designer is going to do, is help you get clear on your values first. If you're a company and you're having problem with your culture, it's so imperative that, because here's the thing, is you're known for your culture, whether you know it or not. You may say we don't have a culture, but you do. And by the way, you're known for it. It's your reputation, And so if you've got a challenge and you've got these, 5 values on the wall, but we don't have the right sense of ownership in this, I challenge you also to kind of reduce and say, what do we really believe in? What's our people? Or I'm sorry, what's our purpose principle? What's our people principle? And again, just take people and plug it into a thesaurus, and it could be collaboration, it could be feedback, it could be whatever. Your learning principle could be data driven, it could be intelligent design. But find your values and then use those to amplify your brand quite naturally, actually, because there is a lot of, again, natural momentum between the principles when done right, but also it turns into natural outward momentum, because you see how easily, you were even kind of like, hey, what about this? And it kind of captivates. And again, I'm sort of an open source guy. So if anybody would, wants insights or wants to talk about it, I'm happy to share what I know.
No, I love that, and I want to. I would love to, because I feel like, for the sake of time, because we're an hour and 11 minutes,
Sure.
I want to have you back, Adam. I'd love to be able to do that soon, and I want to just focus on Canary, especially culture, because I feel like if we try to go 20, 30 minutes, we're not even going to cover the organizational development, business transportation, cultural advocacy. You talk about change, about being a critical path, and you get into strategy, execution, engagement. And I would love to dive into each of those with you and kind of make a theme of a show. And we can schedule this out. But I want to make a theme of the show, just how we follow these steps, how we move through that direction. But one of the things that you say, and I love this, and I know you took it from a quote, is we will arrive where we started and know the place for the first time.
Yeah, it's a great way to end, and I thank you for the invitation, and I'd love to come back. I really just think the world of what you're doing, and I think it's so smart. Just from a positioning standpoint. Not to, again, not everything in life is leverage. I mean, I'm moved by it, I should say, and not in a, oh, it's such a smart market play, but it's just like, this is
leverage.
well, it's exactly and it's exactly where we are. These are the times. I mean, people can watch what you're doing right now. And it's a little bit like a masterclass, really, in terms of like, you just it's conversations and service, right? And then new levels of permission outflow from that. So I would love to come back. Here's an idea for you too: is even if you wanted to either have a case study, or even somebody, we could even work through it a little bit, or we could just do it theoretically, as you say. We can get into what all those things mean. And the best part of it is, really, the guts of it is kind of what I shared today. Even if we're talking about succession planning and strategic change and all those things, it really does, a lot of it, come back to that good common sense that your grandma taught you about being with people and being a host and all that. But it's a good conversation, because you can really drive some depth into practical business applications. So I'd love to come back and talk about people.
And I think culture is so esoteric, and people, like, and I don't want to get into this right now, but like, you have a default culture, if you're not paying any attention to this, all these things need to be taken the time to be explained, because we always talk about culture, but really we're not taking it as the catalyst to move us in the. We always think of it as like an HR thing, like like, I mean, pardon my French, but like a side piece. It's like that other thing, culture. Oh yeah, we have great culture. I buy snacks or I get lunch for the team every once in a while. We kind of look at it that instead of it being the DNA of everything that you do in your organization. But one of the things that you talked about, and with this model, and I encourage people they can go to Canary, like you said, knari.co, or they can go to the slowviking.com, and that has what kind of journey you on. It has the personal growth, the education, the teams, and the enterprises, and the diagrams on that. But one of the things that you said on here, which I thought was interesting, is, and maybe we could close out on this, is the learning and development, the growth and the change, the culture and the communication, and the leadership and lessons that we learn, not just in our organization, but that we learn in life too.
Yep. Well, that's exactly right. I mean, it's like just kind of a synergizing of a lot of the things, for us. And you asked about arriving back where we began to know it for the first time. I think that's E. E. Cummings. I forget exactly. It's there on the page, but it's exactly that. Is like is through this process of being willing to take that step out. Okay, so creating a space to engage or to just do something, right? Put up a podcast, go talk to some, go do whatever, have a conversation with somebody for that purpose. Then we're going to learn. That's those life lessons you're talking about, and then ultimately what the output of it. Okay, the service, the outcome, the learning, all that leads back to arriving at this place.
Mm-hmm.
A new. It's like it's still the same story. Like if I told you the story of my wife and me, 15 years ago, it'd be like, well, she's from Slovakia. I'm here. I'm working in this company. We've got a little real estate on the side. We're trying to hustle, sell some things on the internet, trying to learn how to invest. And ideally one day we want to live, more freely between the two continents. Well, flash forward 15 years. And in fact, I did write a bunch of goals about that. So there's a case for visualization and goals. I was like, I wish I would have written more, but it's still kind of the same story, even though it's like really progressed. We're still effectively trying to live, more freely on continents, and so in each iteration, I'm big too when you talk in terms of process, like on agile, like fast iteration, fail forward fast, fail forward fast, fail forward fast, and learn. And if you learn it each time, then you can get something that's really highly functional in a short amount of time. So that's kind of what we mean from a business standpoint about arriving back where you were to know it for the first time. Is you grant the sandbox, they fail, they learn, they get better, and all of a sudden that thing you're the sandbox you're trying to open, this self-direction, is broader, and then you go through it again, give them a little more, they learn more, they come back. And so that's, again, we're just again and again arriving at the place we started, but with a new, when we say to know it to know it new, is like we know it at that new level. And that's sort of what it's all about.
No, I appreciate that, Adam. I appreciate you being on the show, and like I said, I want to have you back, and I want to get into Canary. If somebody wants to get a hold of you for consulting, I know you live in Rio Rancho, so you're local. It's not some company that you're talking to in Silicon Valley or whatever, and they're you've lived here before, you understand the situation. Maybe it's somebody that's trying to pivot in their organization. Maybe
Yep.
they're dealing with culture, maybe it's leadership or whatever, and they need to be able to have somebody. What is the best way that they can get a hold of you?
Yeah, I'm going to give you. So we already gave the Canary website, which is knari.co, so canary.co. And there is a form there, and you can fill out, some information about your project and these and that. I'll give you my personal email address too, or I'm sorry. Let's see. You know what? I think the form is just fine. I don't know if that's the right thing to put my personal email address out on a podcast that
No, yeah,
lives forever on the internet.
yeah. We get all kinds of people listening to the podcast from all around the world. So,
Let's do
I've seen
this. You,
somebody,
you know
I
what?
had
You
that,
go ahead.
and they literally got spammed on their email.
Yeah, so let's do that. So if you go to Canary, KNARI.co, there's a form right at the bottom of the page. It's a one-page website. You can let me know who you are, give me your email address, or however you'd like to be contacted. I'm so happy to engage in conversation, because you know what? Conversation is free. And even for me, it's like if you think that I might be able to add value to your situation, I'm happy to have that conversation by any means. We can do it asynchronously by email. If you want to get together for a quick chat, that's fine too. I'd love to hear what you're up to, what you're trying to accomplish, and if there's a way that we can add value. And I will say that goes because of our unique breadth of experience, that goes if it's somebody who's looking to pivot outside of their 9 to 5, try to just augment their side hustle or to get their next thing going. If it's somebody who's in charge of teams, so either a manager or teams in the community or a church or wherever. And then again, if you're a team leader of teams or an enterprise leader, I'd love to talk as well about that. And we can, I feel like that the message. So one of the things they say too is like, you don't want to be too broad. The biggest mistake that consultants make is they say, I can help everybody, and I don't really feel like that's what we're saying when I say, I can help you if you're an individual, a team leader, or an enterprise, because really the message is kind of the same. You know what I mean? That's what when you go to, and you'll actually find kind of the three various models at slowviking.com, and that's slowviking.com. But it's sort of like, that's the approach. That's sort of our core approach. And then we can adapt it as needed. And again, it's just because I've had the experience. I've been the person pivoting out. I've been the person leading teams. And then ultimately I've had some team enterprise leadership, various degrees of enterprise leadership.
Yeah, and I love what you say about Canary. You say Canary exists to make your change manageable, and I think I think that's like sums it up in the format of what you're trying to do in serving and helping others.
Well, absolutely, and I might even add to that because it's not, it's not as set in stone as much as you might think. But the word that pops up to me today, and I love the interplay and the evolution and all that of words, is it's also about making your change accountable. At the end of the day,
Yes.
one of the best things we can do at Canary, even in like an enterprise setting, is to come in and help you affect your change, but also keep you accountable to the culture, which is the key. See, I felt like when we went through that merger, I thought no one's really advocating for the people on the front line anymore. It used to be built into the management culture. And then when the management changed, away went that accountability. And that's the challenge, is if you're looking down the barrel of this big change event, to the tune of millions or tens of millions, like an ERP rollout or whatever, a lot has to go right. And one of the worst things that can happen is, particularly in mergers, okay, acquisitions are a little easier because you get to call the culture, right? They're coming to your culture. But the merger space and some other spaces, you've got this real risk of, again, the highly competent person or group of people who are basically, maybe not making decisions. We're not all rowing in the right direction. And it's critical. It's people who say, oh, we don't really invest in culture, or it's a hard sell. I don't really fully believe that, because I know enough people have been down that road where they've seen, a hole get poked in the boat, and it was a big boat. It was a very costly boat, and it was little more than toxicity at work, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, no, and I love that, and I love that word accountability, because it so many times when the change gets hard, then people want to, they'll give up or they'll pivot in a different direction that's easier, because trying to steer. It's like, I always love that quote about herding cats.
Right.
Sometimes as a manager or an entrepreneur or a business owner, it's just trying to get everybody together and to be able to row in the same direction. And that's where you can come in, look at an organization, come externally, get the leaders together, get managers together, and a lot. It's so surprising when I had. What I just want to give you, and I want to give people that are looking at debating. Maybe there's a business owner out there that's listening right here, and he's debating whether to hire you or not, Adam. One of the biggest things that I had when I had a business consultant come in several years back, and one of the things that he told me that I never would have guessed, he said, the biggest thing that I found in your organization is how much they love the printed newsletter that is
Mm.
made, that is put on your pay stub
Mm.
every month. So I was about ready to do away with it because it was just a printed newsletter and it takes a lot of time to have somebody put it together. But we had birthdays in there and we had pet pictures and we had all that stuff, and we will use, we won't say names, but I think the next podcast we have where we get into culture, we'll do some XYZ companies. But I know quite a few, and I know you've seen a lot, and maybe we can use these types of companies, and even the mistakes that I've made will because we're both extremely transparent. We can roll with those with culture. But it was one of the things that I did not even think about, but it literally shocked me, that was one of the things that they valued on a scale of 1 to 10. That was a 10 for them. And that's something that you can bring into an organization, is when you're starting to investigate and see and have these conversations and see what's moving, you're able to say, okay, let me help you steer the ship in this direction. If you do this, this, and this, if you see this, this, and this, then we can turn that, basically there's a book about it, but turn the ship around and get it in the direction that you want to go in. So, Adam, once again, I want everybody to go to knari.co, get a hold of you. I'll also be putting you in, and I have a big email newsletter that goes out. I think I don't know if that's how you saw it, or if you had however you got a hold of me, but I have about 7,000 business leaders here in New Mexico, so I'll put that out there. I want people to get a hold of you, just being able to talk to you. And I know, we talked a little bit on email, and then today I can tell, and then saying how honest and transparent you are. I really appreciate that. I appreciate what you're doing. In anyone that says, how can I provide value? How can I serve? That right there, to me, that tells you what type of person they are, if you know what I mean.
Well, I acknowledge you for the very same reason, and I thank you for the opportunity. And you said it a minute ago. You said when the going gets tough, it shows character and it exposes culture, and people, have it's natural to revert almost to a survival type situation, and you see that take the wind out of enterprise's progress too. Is again when we focus on who's right, not what's right, it just takes the wind out of it because maybe somebody's trying to jockey for a position or just survive for their job. But I just want to encourage all of our brethren and sisters here in Albuquerque and everywhere, you know what I mean, who are dealing with the whole COVID thing. The good news is, and in my opinion, is that in spite of this very real, potential threat, and all of the very real emotional stuff that went on with it, is we can still have space. Even though we are kind of everybody starts thinking about survival, right? We stock up and we do all these things, we socially distance, but that to live from that space, to live from just pure survival, it's incredibly toxic. It's not healthy. It's not healthy to individuals or organizations. So I just want to encourage everyone, in this time of crisis or whatever it is, perceived crisis, that survival is great, and we've got to find that space where we can sort of, as you said, just give freely, right? For some space, whether it's here digitally, whether it's online, whether it's having Zoom meetings or creating a Facebook stream, but to have that free service, because it just means so much. I think it means a lot for us, not only now, but it means really a lot for just the future of us all, is how we respond in these times. Do we go further into the cave, or do we, kind of reach out and connect in spite of it? So I thank you for your service, Jason.
Yeah. Thank you, Adam. I appreciate it. Have a wonderful day.
You too, sir. Bye.
Thank you for joining us on the Albuquerque Business Podcast. And thanks to our sponsor, RigbyDigital.com. Make sure to subscribe and share. And go to abqpodcast.com. Get show notes, resources, and links to everything we talked about today to help you navigate your journey as an entrepreneur and business owner.